Hello, Doctor. Good day, and thank you for Dr. Hirwan to listening to our presentation. Today, our team will discuss the ethical and legal issue faced by Tokra Sdn. Our group consists of five members: Akmal, Sharifah, Emerald, Kevin, and myself, Nick. This presentation examines the ethical and legal issue faced by Tokra Sdn. After investigation revealed unethical practice within its supply chain. The discussion focused on ethical principles, management responsibility, governance mechanism, ethic program, and recommendation for improving ethical governance and reducing future legal and reputational risks. Ethics has become increasingly important in modern business because customers, regulators, and investors expect companies to operate responsibly and transparently. Business are no longer just solely on profit but also on how they treat employees, protect the environment, and manage their supply chains. Modern business are expected to operate responsibly and transparently. Tokra marketed its product as ethically sourced and environmentally sustainable. However, investigation later revealed significant ethical shortcomings among suppliers. This raised concerns regarding management oversight, governance effectiveness, and reliability of company ethical claims. In the case of Tokra Berhad, the company marketed its product as ethically sourced, environmentally sustainable, and socially responsible. However, investigation later revealed questionable labor practice, weak environmental compliance, misleading supplier declaration, and poor transparency among the suppliers. This finding raised concern regarding the effectiveness of the company ethical governance and management oversight. This case demonstrates the importance of applying ethical principles throughout the entire supply chain rather than relying solely on supply assurance. I will hand over to our next point, ethical concept in management and business transaction to my next member.
Assalamualaikum and hi to everyone. Now I would like to continue on my part, which is ethical concept in management and business transaction. As we all know, there is three main pillars of ethical concept in management and business transaction, which is integrity, accountability, and transparency. Integrity refers to the moral principle, honesty, and consistency in business conduct, and it is considered as one of the fundamental ethical values that guide managerial decision making and organizational behavior. Accountability is referred to the obligation of individual and organization to accept the responsibility for their action and decision, meaning that the ethical organization must establish clearly accountability structure to ensure that the management can be held responsible for business outcome and stakeholder impact. And the last one is transparency is involving openly disclosing accurate and relevant information to the stakeholders, which enable them to make informed on what decision and promotes long-term trust between the organization and the public. In the case of Tokra Sdn, integrity become a major concern when investigation reveal between the company public claim and the actual practices of certain suppliers. Tokra market the imported product as ethically sources, environmental sustainability, and also society responsibility. However, the responsibility is not only on the company but also the public and also the stakeholder. In Tokra cases, management cannot transfer entire responsibility to the supplier because the company directly benefit from the sales of the product marketed under the ethical and sustainability branding. So the company has a clear responsibility, and the discovery of unethical supplier practices indicate that major shortcoming in Tokra accountability mechanism, particularly regarding the supply chain oversight. So from this, we can see that the Tokra Sdn Berhad is actually enforced a strict corporate liability to resign where a commercial organization is guilty of and often is a person of third party supplier associated with engaged in corrupt or fraudulent act. To enhance the transparency and rebuild the institutional credibility, Tokra should implement a comprehensive audited sustainability and also provide the stakeholder with a direct, verified, and also clear access to the relevant supplier compliance information. Achieving this greater level of operational transparency will not only strengthen the consumer confidence through the institutional collaboration with national consumer, but also it will legally demonstrate that company absolute committed to the ethical business practices and fulfill the risk disclosure expectations set by Malaysia Code of Corporate Governance.
Greetings to Dr. Hirwan. I'm Emerald Sularaja and I'm here to present about evaluation of ethical strategies in the business environment. So if you say this chapter is actually being done is to assess the effectiveness of Tokra's ethical strategies, identify weaknesses that led to ethical issues, and also evaluate the impact on stakeholders and business reputation. And the key areas that's evaluated is four key areas, which is one is ethical leadership and management commitment, second is corporate governance mechanisms, third is stakeholder engagement strategies, and fourth is ethical control over supply chain transactions. This evaluation actually helps to determine whether Tokra's ethical strategies were sufficient to prevent misconduct and maintain stakeholder trust. This slide will be discussing about the evaluation of ethical leadership and management commitment. It actually refers to management's commitment to ethical decision making and responsible business conduct. So Tokra has actually demonstrated some commitment to ethics by promoting ethically sustainable and sourced products. And the company also conducted compliance reviews to support its claim. However, the company's leadership relied too heavily on supplies assurance without conducting sufficient independent verification and also failed to verify supplier claims independently. Furthermore, unethical labor practices and environmental issues within the supply chain were not identified until external investigations occurred. So, therefore, Tokra's ethical leadership can be evaluated as moderate to weak because ethical commitment existed, but the leadership oversight was insufficient due diligence. So this part we'll be doing the evaluation of corporate governance mechanism. So corporate governance actually refers to the systems and processes used to direct and control an organization. And Tokra had governance procedures and compliance systems implemented and in place, indicating an awareness of governance responsibilities. And this is intended to ensure accountability and compliance. However, these governance mechanisms were not effective enough to detect unethical risk in the supply chain, and also they were weak in monitoring and in auditing processes, and furthermore, they had poor ethical risk management. So, therefore, based on this evaluation, it's actually partially effective because the governance structures exist but were not effectively enforced. So this slide we will be talking about the evaluation of engagement strategies. So stakeholder engagement actually involves communicating and also collaborating with parties affected by business operations, including customers, regulators, suppliers, and investors. So Tokra actually communicated its commitment to ethical sourcing and sustainability, and the company also responded to concerns raised by stakeholders. However, stakeholders' concerns were addressed too late. The communication channels were effective, and also the engagement was reactive rather than proactive. Therefore, this evaluation is actually partially effective because Tokra is unable to maintain stakeholder trust and confidence. So, this slide, we are going to be doing the evaluation of ethical control over supply chain transactions. Okay, so ethical control over supply chain transaction is essential because companies are increasingly expected to take responsibility for the conduct of their suppliers. And Tokra actually required supplier assurances and implemented basic compliance procedures. But however, investigation revealed lack of independent supplier verification, poor supply chain transparency, labor and environmental issues remain undetected. And based on this evaluation, Tokra's ethical control over supply chain transaction is weak because it failed to effectively identify and prevent unethical supplier behavior. So, in conclusion, Tokra had several ethical strategies in place, including leadership initiatives, governance systems, stakeholder engagement efforts, and supply chain controls. But however, the main issue was not the absence of ethical strategies, but actually the ineffective implementation of those strategies. One of it is weak monitoring, insufficient verification, and poor oversight allowed unethical practices within the supply chain to remain undetected. So, overall, Tokra's ethical strategies were only partially effective and require significant improvements to strengthen accountability, transparency, and ethical governance in future business transactions. That's all from me. Thank you.
Hi, all. Good day. Thank you, Doctor, for giving us this golden opportunity to present about this topic today. So, I would like to present about Chapter 4 Evaluation of Organizational Ethics Programs. Okay, so Tokra Sdn. Okay, this evaluation focuses on how effective the company ethics program were in preventing unethical behavior. So, ensuring compliance with ethical standards and prompting responsible ethical business conduct based on the case study. Several weaknesses were identified in Tokra's ethical systems, particularly within its supply chain management practices. So, organizational ethics programs are designed to promote ethical behavior, support ethical decision making, and ensure compliance with legal and organizational standards. In Tokra's case, several suppliers were found to be involved in questionable and insufficient transparency. Although the company relied on internal compliance reviews and supplier assurance, these measures failed to identify the issues before they become public. And this suggests that Tokra's ethics program were not effective in managing ethical risk within its supply chain. Okay, next we're gonna talk about code of ethics. One of the most important components of an ethics program is code of ethics. A code of ethics provides clear behavioral guidelines for employees and business partners. Okay, in Tokra, likely had policies supporting ethical sourcing and sustainability. The unethical actions of suppliers indicate that these policies were not effectively enforced. An ethics code is only effective when it is clearly communicated, consistently monitored, and supported by strong enforcement mechanisms. In Tokra's case, the code of ethics appears to have functioned more as a formal document rather than an actively enforced framework. Okay, another important component is ethics training. Ethics training helps employee recognize ethical issues, understand organizational values, and make responsibility decisions. Okay. So, however, Tokra's procurement and supply chain staff appear to rely heavily on supplier disclosures without conducting sufficient verification. This suggests that employees may not have received adequate training in supplier diligence, risk assessment, ethical sourcing, and fraud detection. Without proper training, employees may fail to recognize warning signs of unethical behavior. Okay, next is very interesting, whistleblowing system. Okay, so the effectiveness of Tokra's whistleblowing procedures can also be questioned. Why? The whistleblowing systems are intended to provide employees and stakeholders with a safe and confidential method of reporting unethical conduct. However, this misconduct within Tokra's supply chain was exposed through external investigation rather than internal reporting mechanism. So this indicates that employees or stakeholders may not have trusted the reporting system or may not have had access to effective reporting channels. Strong whistleblowing system encourage transparency and allow organizations to address ethical concerns before they become major issues. Okay, moving forward, we're going to talk about compliance and monitoring. Okay, so Tokra's monitoring and compliance system also appear to have been inadequate. Although the company conduct internal compliance reviews, it failed to identify significant ethical violations among suppliers. The company relied heavily on supplier assurance instead of uh, independent verification. Effective compliance systems should include regular supplier audits, independent inspections, and sustainability assessment and continuous monitoring of supplier performance. The absence of these measures allowed unethical practice to continue undetected. Yeah, this is very interesting also. Risk management and ethical leadership. So this case also highlights weakness in Tokra's risk management system and ethical leadership. Strong internal controls are necessary to identify, assess, and minimize ethical risk. However, Tokra failed to detect the false statement and unethical supplier behavior. So, which indirectly shows the weakness in its verification and risk assessment process. In addition, ethical leadership plays a key role in shaping organizational culture. The gap between Tokra's public claims and the actual behavior of some suppliers raises concerns regarding management oversight and accountability. As we all know, ethical leadership requires active monitoring, transparency, and commitment to ethical business practices. Okay, now we are in the conclusion slide for chapter 4. So, in conclusion, Tokra Sdn Berhad organization's ethics programs were largely, I would say, ineffective in preventing and detecting unethical behavior within its supply chain. Although the ethical policies and procedures may have existed, but still they lacked effective enforcement, monitoring, training, and leadership support. The company's heavy reliance on supplier assurance, weak compliance mechanisms, inadequate risk management, and ineffective whistleblowing systems contributed to its failure to identify misconduct. Therefore, significant improvements are needed in ethical governance, supplier oversight, monitoring systems, and employee training to strengthen organizational integrity and accountability. Okay, so far, thank you for your attention. Thank you, doctor. Thank you all.
Now we move on to chapter 5, critical evaluation and ethical governance recommendation. So far, we have analyzed what went wrong at Tokra, from false marketing to a total lack of supply chain transparency. Therefore, here we propose 5 strategic recommendations, starting with first panel on our slide, which is strengthening corporate governance and board accountability. So under section 213 to 217 of Malaysian Companies Act 2016, director and company manager must have a good leadership behavior, honesty, wise, and careful in making decisions, all while in the best interest of the business. However, Tokra, their management completely failed in this duty, as instead of active leadership, they are passive, irresponsible, and lazy. Because as we can see in the case study, they blindly trusted unverified supplier paperwork without checking the fact and know whether the supplier is good or they fabricate their data. While profiting from public claim that their product were ethically sourced and environmentally friendly. Therefore, to permanently fix this and prevent regulatory penalties, we must align directly with the Malaysian Code on Corporate Governance (MCCG), where we recommend for Tokra to immediately establish a brand new complete independent risk and sustainability committee to oversee all supply transactions. In this slide, we can see there are a green shade in this infographic where this shield represent our risk and sustainability committee as the frontline defenses for Tokra. Plus, Tokra must also mandate continuous ethic training for all their director, so it can help director to catch fraudulent supply behavior early rather than waiting for an external crisis to blow up in the media. Next, we move on to point 2, which is enhancing compliance system and legal enforcement. So look at the top right panel featuring the heavy backlog. Here, we can say that relying blindly on unverified supplier promises is a massive criminal risk under Malaysian law. Tokra could face a severe exposure under Section 17A of MACC Act 2009, and this strict corporate liability law means that if any worker or third-party supplier use bribe or fraud to benefit, all of the blame will be given to Tokra, and they will automatically be guilty. It doesn't matter whether the management in Tokra are aware or unaware of this thing. So the penalties are terrifying because the minimum fine of 1 million ringgit could be fined to Tokra, or even up to 10 times the bribe value, and up to 20 years in prison for the director and the manager in Tokra. So for those who think this won't be enforced, we can look at an example case study of Pristine Offshore Icon in this slide, where in 2021, they became the first commercial entity in Malaysia to be convicted under this exact law. So we hope that Tokra will not become this next public figure failure. So to protect themselves, they must deploy the only legal defense available, which is adequate procedure, where they build this safety shield using the government official trust guideline, where is 1, T is top level committee from leadership, R, continuous risk assessment, U, undertaking strict control measure and systematic review of operation, and T, training and open communication. So operationally, the day of trusting passive declaration are over, where they must send real investigator to physically inspect supply factory, where if any supplier falsifies data or refuse any audit, they can sever the contract immediately. So that is how they turn compliance into unbreakable safety net. And then the third point is empowering ethic program, training and reporting mechanism, where strong law, they means nothing if employee don't live by them or follow these rules. So we must turn from Tokra rules and regulation into an active part of their daily operation. For example, they can use 3 pillars code, which is one engagement, by ditching their law and regulation dry textbook and use and more efficient way, which is use impactful Malaysian business scandals, so our supply chain staff immediately recognize the real world dilemma. Second is analytic, where they track completion data and safely report to pinpoint exactly which department are failing to spot a red flag. And third is adaptability, where they are updating their program instantly whenever new law environmental rules are introduced. But what happened when an employee actually spot an illegal supply practices? So currently, our internal system are failing because unethical action were exposed by external parties and not even from our workers themselves. Why? Because employees, they are terrified of retaliation. So even with the Whistleblower Protection Act 2010, Transparency International Malaysia warns that employees are too scared to report misconduct. So to permanently help this, Tokra must establish a completely secure, strictly confidential whistleblower hotline managed by an outside independent provider, so internal management cannot track caller. Lastly, we can see at the screw icon. This screw icon represents our CEO, where they must sign a public written promises to guarantee 100% protection from termination and demotion or punishment for any worker or contractor that became a whistleblower. Number 4 is the recommendation of ensuring responsible supply chain and stakeholder practices across the top panel of our second visual. In here, we can see that Tokra, they cannot hide behind outside supplier, as they are legally and socially responsible for their entire upstream value chain. So by checking on their supplier in a strict business requirement under the Environmental Quality Amendment of Act 2024, the Malaysian government has raised an environmental pollution fine to a massive maximum up to 10 million and introduced a mandatory jail time for corporate bosses if they do wrong. So they need to dump their supplier, as if their supplier do wrong like dump toxic waste or break law while making their product, automatically Tokra leadership will face a fine like we say in previous slide, where up to 1 million or 10 times the bribe or a prison sentences. So beyond the courtroom, they will face an immediate threat to their brand equity, organic consumer boycott. So look at the historical lesson of nation. For example, we can say like Sindabi Plantation case or even Top Glove Corporation, where both of these company, they suffer devastating global export ban and severe financial drop because they fail to properly supervise their contractor compliance and labor standard. And if so, we can wonder that if this thing can even destroy those big giant corporation, then how about Tokra? So to fully insulate this company, they must adopt the UN guiding principle on business and human rights through these 3 step action plan, which is 1, to use legal force, where they abide by the strict supplier code of conduct into buying contract, by legally binding supplier to Malaysian Employment Act 1955 and Environmental Quality of Act 1974. Second is independent verification, where they are no longer rely on unverified promises from the supplier. Instead, they must hire an independent inspection firm like maybe SGC or Intellect, so to conduct an unannounced audit directly to the supplier factory themselves. And a third is protective stakeholder dialogue, where Tokra, they must open a more transparent communication channel with a national consumer group, for example, like FOMCA or Transparency International Malaysia. Therefore, by sharing the audited complaints data, they can prove that they have nothing to hide and instantly crushing all public opinion about them. And last but not least is cultivating ethical leadership and organizational culture. So Tokra, they can rewrite their rule books, sign contract or even hire expensive auditor all day. But Tokra will only stay safe for long term if they really change their daily habit. For example, through corporate ethics, they cannot just be a passive statement on the website, but they must really implement it in their daily routine of company operation. So to visualize this, we can look at the three in this slide we create, where first the top level committee, where the ethical changes started at the top. So the executive manager must lead by example. For example, they prove to their employees, staff, that the corporate integrity matters far more than cutting corners to save money. And then we look at the second point at the left branch, where it is an incentivizing ethic, where they must align with Bursa Malaysia's modern guideline. Executive financial bonus and promotion will be tied directly to behavioral and environmental KPI. So like if manager in Tokra, they buy a cheap goods or raw material from a polluting supplier just to make a quick revenue for Tokra, so they will instantly lose their bonus. And on the other side, we must reward compliance, not just raw profit. And then we can look at that in the middle branches, which is mentorship. We will establish a structured corporate mentorship program where experienced leader guide young manager on making fair, transparent choices under high pressure scenario. And then the public accountability branches, where Tokra will publish a public year ethical governance report, where this will openly detail exactly how many suppliers we inspected, the issue uncovered, and how we correct them without revealing private names. And lastly is the award and swift punishment branches, where on the right, where it tells about Tokra should be actively give out corporate award to honest worker while swiftly punish anyone who breach their compliance standard. So that's it for chapter 5.
In conclusion, the Tokra case demonstrates how weaknesses in ethical governance can create serious legal operation and reputation risks. Although the company claimed to rely on supplier assurance and compliance procedures, these controls are insufficient to prevent unethical conduct within the supply chain. Our evaluation found weaknesses in integrity, accountability, transparency, leadership, governance, stakeholder engagement, and ethics programs. These shortcomings highlight the need for stronger ethical control and more proactive management oversight. Ultimately, ethical governance is not about complying with law and regulation. It is also about building trust, protecting corporate reputation, and ensuring long-term business sustainability. Companies that successfully integrate ethical principles into their operation are more likely to achieve sustainable growth and maintain stakeholder confidence. Okay, that's all from our presentation. Thank you, Doctor, for listening to our presentation.